Good morning to our audiences joining us from the United States. Good afternoon to our audiences joining us from Europe, and especially good evening to our audiences and our panelists joining us from Indonesia. I'm very excited to be able to present and moderate today's session. My name is Christina Tobias Nahi. I am part of the advisory of the G20 Interfaith Forum, who is graciously hosting this webinar today. And I'm also the Director of Public Affairs at Islamic Relief USA in the Washington, D.C. area. And we have a very special workshop that we're going to present to you today. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, or perhaps you've been with us before, I just wanted to speak again on behalf of the G20 Interfaith Forum. You can find more information about their activities at g20interfaith.org. And one of the things that they're doing is really looking at the cutting issues and the pressing global issues of our times, whether that is refugees and immigrants, whether that is climate change, which is the topic of today, whether it is gender, another topic of today, and so many others. And you can visit the website and see all of the various working groups that address these issues. And what's especially impactful about the work of the G20 Interfaith Forum is they look at these global pressing issues through a lens of faith as well. And so we'll be examining that today in our address. I would like to begin actually by presenting some of our wonderful speakers. Today's topic, as you have probably seen when you registered, is women and girls at the front line of climate change. And today will be a particular look at Indonesia. And why Indonesia? Well, last year, Indonesia was the host of the G20. So these issues are very pertinent. And the G20 colleagues of ours who are probably on this call today from some of those other working groups and organizations and institutions that are also part of the advisory or participate, many of them have just come back from India in the last couple of days, as India is the host this year, and they will be having their proceedings in September coming. But the faith communities like to visit the hosting country a few months preceding the big convening and remind leaders and policymakers of the moral imperative of including faith and faith voices in these very important discussions that are affecting us all today. So I would like to, without further ado, read quickly some of the bios. We do have one change on our flyer today. Sister Shaheen from Islamic Relief Worldwide was not able to join us due to a flight delay, but her very able and competent colleague, Saval, will be stepping into her place, and she was also part of the research that's going to be spoken about today. So we'll be looking forward to hearing her framing that discussion. So I will start with Saval. Saval Oz is the Global Advocacy Research and Project Coordinator at Islamic Relief Worldwide, as mentioned in the UK. She has extensive experience with women's rights groups and faith-based nonprofit organizations, where she has led interfaith dialogue initiatives and worked closely with women and girls at risk of violence. She has previously coordinated the research for the advocacy report that we're about to hear, and some others as well, and she may have time at the end to talk about those. And currently she's working on a report on the impact of climate change and food insecurity, particularly as it pertains to female-led households and women farmers. So we'll be, looking forward to having her talk about this research. As we proceed, I'm going to mention the next three speakers in order that they will appear. Dr. Baik Yolfia is a gender expert and lecturer at the University of Mataram in Indonesia. And since 2012, she has been a researcher and leader on the intersectionality between climate change and gender in Indonesia. She holds a doctorate in rural community development from Massa University, New Zealand. And we were just talking about New Zealand before everyone joined us today. Next, we will be followed by Mr. Ade, who actually is a colleague of ours. He's the head of programs of Islamic Relief Indonesia. And as such, he's been working in the sustainable development sector for over 18 years. This includes experience in strengthening community resilience, supporting disaster risk reduction strategies, WASH, which is water and sanitation, financing, business continuity planning, management of natural resources, including forest and coastal ecosystems, and hopefully we will be hearing more about that today. Also women's empowerment, enterprise development, advocacy, which is a special favorite of ours here in Washington, D.C., and the development of public-private partnerships. And he holds a Master's of Social Work from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was also a Ford Foundation International Fellow. And then finally, we will have with us Dr. Suryani Ika, who is an urban development and regional planner for the provisional government of NTB province. She'll be sharing some slides with us. She's serving as the former Secretary of Transportation of the West Nusa Tenggara province, NTB province, and she is a trusted source authoring numerous publications that focus on sustainable development for modes of transportation, infrastructure, the economy, and policy. She's also written some other research I hope that she'll get a chance to talk about, and she also holds a doctorate in planning from the School of People, Environment, and Planning from Massey University in New Zealand as well. So without further ado, I would like to pass it to my colleague in the UK, Saval, to kind of talk about why this research, why now, what was the methodology, the process, maybe some of the funding, and then again, keeping in mind that Indonesia was the host last year of the G20, kind of how it fits into that framework as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. A huge thank you to the G20 Interfaith Forum for hosting us. And thank you to everyone for joining online. So I want to, as Christina has said, I want to give a brief introduction into why this is such a critical topic for us here at IRW, why we've conducted this research and what we're trying to achieve before I pass it over to my colleagues. So I will try to keep it relatively quick and brief. But I just want to say, as the growing number of climate emergencies throughout the world clearly shows, focusing on adaptation is a crucial, pressing necessity. We know that adaptation and disaster risk management save lives, which is why we need gender-sensitive and locally based adaptation more than ever to ensure that vulnerable communities are protected from the worst impacts of the disasters. The Global Commission on Adaptation finds that spending just $800 million on adaptation could avoid losses of $3 billion to $16 billion per year. Yet half of all countries do not have early warning systems in place. And so as the international community, and particularly as a faith-based community, we have the legal and moral imperative to make the necessary interventions now to ensure effective adaptation, which includes and prioritizes the leadership of local communities, and particularly women and girls. So to that end, Islamic Relief has been working on adaptation projects in Indonesia for several years. One of our more recent projects have included the gender-based climate field school, where farmers from East Lombok were given training in climate literacy and community-based adaptation methods, which combine indigenous knowledge with newer technologies. And so with this project, we wanted to ensure equitable participation for women and girls and to reduce their vulnerability through enhancing the capacities of women to adapt to climate change. And through establishing community climate groups. And as a result of this project, we found that not only did the school result in significantly increased productivity for majority of the farmers that participated, but it also bolstered community participation overall and decision-making in climate change adaptation, particularly for women and girls who are often excluded. And so following from the success of this project, Islamic Relief Indonesia and Konsepsi hosted a Road to COP26 event. And the recommendations and commitments drawn from this event were then taken forward at COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, where IR Indonesia explored the nexus between gender-based climate adaptation and localization in Indonesia. So this research that we're going to be talking about in detail today is just a part in the series of adaptation projects and discussions that we have been leading in Indonesia. We believe that evidence-based and locally led research is the key to producing policy solutions that lead to the type of community-based and gender-sensitive adaptation that we are seeking to implement. So what are the findings of the research? I just want to touch on a few very primary points before I pass it over to my colleagues to give an in-depth explanation. According to the research, we've found that women and girls in Lombok have less access to resources, skills, and decision-making on average due to pre-existing inequalities and disparities, meaning that they are the first to be impacted and the last to recover from the impacts of climate change. Financial problems and poverty make the top of the list in terms of the impacts on women and girls. More than half of the women interviewed expressed losing income due to climate change, and 41% stated facing financial difficulty as a result. And this is particularly relevant as climate change has a significant impact on sectors that are dominated by women in Indonesia, such as agriculture. Women and girls also experience additional distress in times of extreme weather events, as they are generally responsible for collecting water for drinking, cooking, washing, raising livestock. And so in drought-prone areas, the time absorbed by water collection increases as women and girls travel greater distances to find water, often in unsanitary and unsafe conditions. Moreover, we found that girls are often the first to be taken out of school when disaster strikes or when family income decreases, as they're seen to belong primarily in the domestic sphere. So this has knock-on effects for adaptation of girls, as nearly double the number of girls report limitations to information on climate change than boys, which is likely due to missed school hours. And for people with disabilities, the limitation to information is even worse. We found that only 14% of persons with disabilities who were surveyed reported even being aware of climate change. And at the present moment, there are no specific integrated plans that are relating to disability and climate change that address this issue. The report also looked at unmarried women who are marginalized due to social stigmas. Nearly all of these women expressed a negative impact on their mental health due to climate change, as they experienced intensified anxiety of disasters and felt increasingly insecure about their futures. Despite all of this significant impact of climate change on the daily lives of women and girls, we found that women were often prevented from participating in decision-making, both on a household and a community level when it came to adaptation. The research found that both married and unmarried women tended to experience more negative feelings, insecurity, and higher health risks due to a lack of participation in adaptation actions. So that was just a brief overview of some of the things that we found. And these are obviously very sobering facts. And I guess that raises the question of what do we do next, which is, of course, not a straightforward question. But I just wanted to touch on a few things. First, we found that one of the most important things and one of the gaps that exist is the lack of cooperation among different actors and different levels. And what we found is that we really, really need to work together if we are to provide meaningful support to rights holders. You know, there's a plethora of evidence that proves NGO programs can have substantial impact on the lives of communities with which they work, but this can only happen if NGOs are filling the gaps of what already exists rather than replicating the same programs or working in a disconjuncted manner. So if we don't cooperate, we risk losing out on the potential of pooling resources for a much greater outcome, but we also risk problems like financial crowding out. So for resources to be used in the most efficient and effective way, we need to form and sustain partnerships that allow us to produce solutions together. And similarly, it is important for national and local bodies of governance to work together to facilitate adaptation, to enable the shifting of power to local communities, and to give local rights holders more access and participation and decision-making. The Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, which was adopted at COP27, firmly puts key human needs at its core, along with concrete specific actions on the ground to build resilience to climate change. The Adaptation Agenda outlines multiple actions and combines the commitments of governments and the non-party stakeholders into a joint vision and joint plan. We need all stakeholders on board to deal with the current and future impacts of climate change, and this is a prime example of how that can happen. And secondly, as the interfaith community, we need to be able to identify and approach social stigmas, harmful attitudes, and cultural biases, which can prevent women and girls from taking ownership of their futures. You know, as the interfaith community, we have an intimate connection to and understanding of local communities through the shared faith component, which means that we have a significant influence on changing hearts and minds. So crucially, we need to be able to do that in ways that are culturally sensitive, context appropriate, and progressive. So I'd just like to conclude by taking us back to the research and explaining why we at IRW are investing so heavily on research, which is led by local researchers. There is a popular mantra which has been repeated by marginalized communities and vulnerable communities for decades, and it's nothing about us without us, right? This means that no policy which impacts a community should be taken without the full participation of the members of that community. As Islamic Relief, we believe that the leadership of local communities at the front line of climate change is critical to building their adaptive capacity. People who are experiencing the effects of climate change firsthand know its impacts much more intimately than anyone else. And so we are saying, knowledge is not just produced by subject experts, it's also produced by salt farmers who are noticing changes in the dry season, by lobster farmers who lose income due to illnesses in lobsters, by scallop collectors who have to walk further to access mangroves. Knowledge is produced by girls who can no longer attend school as they have to work to support their family, by women who have to migrate for work as they can no longer sustain their farms, by persons with disabilities who are getting sicker due to problems caused by extreme weather changes. And so we really need the participation, the leadership, and the knowledge of these people who are at the front line of climate change if we want to ensure adaptation, which does not leave behind those that are the worst impacted. We need to ensure that women and girls are not disempowered or prevented from taking ownership of their lives. We need to ensure that local communities are involved in policies which determine their future. And through our connection to these communities, through our research, and our influence on faith actors and leaders, I'm certain that we will be able to create change together, and that is what we are hoping to do and what we are working towards at Islamic Relief. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Sival, for that brilliant framing of the why and the why now. Before we pass it and shift to the local community voices, which is really what everyone came to hear today, I do want to remind those listening in that we hope that this will be interactive. So as you are listening to the presentations, if you do have any questions or thoughts that arise, whether in terms of gaps or solutions or other, please just put those into the question and answer feature that you have access to. And at the end of the presentations, we will address as many as we're able to. So without further ado, I'd love to pass this over to Dr. Baik Yofia to kick us off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you mind if I share screen? Yeah.
And as she's, yep, all right, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning in USA, good afternoon in UK, and good evening in Indonesia. So thank you very much for giving us opportunity to present our gender mapping activity in 2022. And the title of my presentation is Gender Mapping Analysis in the Context of Low Carbon Development and Resilience on Lombok Island, Indonesia. So here are some of the points I would like to present. Yeah, Lombok is a quite unique area actually, because we seems like we are vulnerable of being affected by climate change. We have some different area, many types of areas which are vulnerable to climate change. We have very dry, like rain-fed land in South and North Island, and South and North part of island. And we also have like temperate climate in mount areas, but we also have fertile land in some other areas. So it's quite varied. So as NTB is people in Lombok, NTB is very vulnerable of being affected by climate change. We think that we need a society will be more resilient to the climate change in more equitable ways. So this also, we put attention to men, women, and vulnerable groups. In 2022, there was an initiative run by Islamic Relief and Concepsi to help local people to adapt to climate change. So there were 3 groups there, with salt, lobster, and crop farming communities. And in 2022, there was like deepening climate change adaptation project as well that emphasized more on gender mapping. Gender mapping also was conducted there. And the result of gender mapping is presented this evening. The aim of this study is to support, basically to support the CAP through gender analysis in the context of low carbon development and climate resilience. This, if you see the left corner, this is Indonesia, and NTB is very small below, and then there are 2 main islands in NTB. It's Lombok Island, the smaller one. The bigger one is Sumbawa Island. And the study was conducted in Jerowaru sub-district. It's very small here in the eastern part of Lombok Island. And if it's zoom out, here are the area, and there are like 13 villages in these sub-districts. And we choose 3 areas where the 3 communities live. So the method of this study is descriptive, and we did survey with interview techniques using questionnaire with structured questions. And there were 90 respondents with 45 men and 45 women in the 3 targeted communities. The data was analyzed by using a gender analysis pathway framework, where we use access, participation, control, and benefits in the domestic and public sectors in the context of low carbon and climate resilient development. And here are the indicators. It's quite many. So for domestic area, there were 14 indicators. You can read here, there are family finance, family loan, family daily consumption, clothing, and so on. And in the right part, that there is 26 indicators for public areas. Okay, so here are the overview of the findings. You can see that from the indicators for the access to domestic affairs, men have 8 more indicators that they more dominant than women. For example, like men have more access in family finance, family loan, daily non-food needs, and yeah, you can see the 8 indicators. And women are more dominant in family daily consumption needs, clothing, family venture capital, water management. What is the blue one? Is the blue points? What are we recognize the most activities that held by women. And here in public affair, there are 21 indicators where men is dominant and for the access, and women all of the activities where women are dominant. It's a very constant in all, like access, participation, control, and benefits. You can see that later. Here is the participation. From the participation aspect, women dominate 8 indicators and men in 6 indicators. In terms of participation in domestic affair, women is hold more dominance activities. And for public affair, you can see that men is more dominant than women. The same as control. Men also women dominate the domestic affair, like family finance, family loan, and you can see the blue color is also the same as the previous aspect, like access and participation. Like family daily consumption needs, clothing needs, water management in the household waste management. And for public affair, men are more dominant in more indicators than women, more activities than women. So for example, like financial management in business, here dominated, women role is more dominant than men. For benefits to domestic and public affairs, men, you can see in domestic affair, women also dominate more indicators or more activities than men, and in public affair, men are more dominant in more activities than women. So if in short, that you can see that here are the indicators for access, participation, control, and benefits. And you can see that both men and women have access to environmentally friendly resources. But in some indicators, although men dominate or women dominate, they have also limited access to, especially to innovations or to government programs, something like that. And especially for, for regulation, policies, laws, they men and women also don't really understand what are regulations in that regarding to environment or climate change. They don't really understand that. And then in terms of access, men also dominated in domestic and public. It's interesting. Not only so, women are more dominant in participation, control, and benefit, but in terms of access, all are dominated by men. Women are more dominant in accessing non-economic resources, for example, like waste management and planting trees, and men have access to productive resources and low carbon innovation. Although, like I said, men and women actually not very familiar with low carbon policies. And then in domestic sector, participation, control, and benefits are also dominated by women, and women are more dominant in managing family needs, including related to low carbon activities, marketing products, and accessing credits. Participation, control, and participation, control, and benefit for the public sector are dominated by men who are closely related to the productive sector. Programs and assistance both for climate change adaptation and mitigation purposes, or indirectly related to climate change. One point also you can see from this research. Sorry, it's okay. Women also if you see in the public affair, women also are more advanced in marketing and also in using internet, digital information, and digital literacy. And here are the recommendation and lesson learned. So intervention should be location specific and contextual. Even within one district, the local culture that influence people perspective and aspiration about climate change is very different. And this gender mapping can help more effective intervention in which men and women dominance are identified. And an intervention can focus on them by recognizing the local culture. And research and development with gender perspective like this study is important as an effort to reach equitable and resilient community to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that overview, Dr. Yulthia. I thought that was fascinating what you just brought out, that last point about internet and gender. Again, the G20 Interfaith also looks at technology. So I think that will be interesting to explore further. A couple of questions have already rolled in. So we'll want to keep the presenters moving along. So we'll have time for the questions at the end. So Mr. Ade, please.
Thank you, Christina. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So good morning for audience who are living in the US. We would like to share our field experience on gender mainstreaming in building community resilience against climate change project in Indonesia. So in here, if you see my screen, there is 6 components we call as a 6A approach, which is approach developed by Islamic Relief worldwide in order to do a gender equality. The first component is analysis. The second is adaptive assistance. The third one is attention to negative effects, and then adequate participations, accountability, adequate capacity, and analysis. And the score used by this approach is 0 for non-inclusive, 0.5 for partially inclusive, 1 for inclusive, 1.5 for adaptive, and this 2 for transformative. So we will sharing with you to what extent our project using this approach for a gender equality effort. Our goal, our project we call is building community resilience against climate change. And the project was aimed at increasing welfare, safety, and protection of people against induced climate hazard. Two strategies we use in this project is capacity improvements on sustainable forest management and resilience building. So our question for this discussion or presentation, how does this project ensure access, participation, control, and benefit for all age segregation, including children, women, disability, and elderly? The first component is on analysis. On sex, age, and disability disaggregated data, we have collected data disaggregated by sex, age, and disability. And also age segregation, we conducted disaggregation of disability using Washington Group question. So having said that, we put our score is 1.5, which is adaptive levels, because we were thinking that SADD has been generated and communicated with district level agency, particularly for women empowerment and child protection. And the second one regarding on age, gender, and diversity analysis, we put score 1.5, which is adaptive, because the project has been able to map power dynamic for various age group, and we were able to map out inequality in access, participation, control, and benefit. On the second component, our approach is adaptive assistance and equitable access. The project activity and strategy and project result has been formulated actually to respond the result of analysis that we mentioned earlier. And that's why we have provided support addressing to the need and trying to answer the challenge or obstacle that we found regarding access, participation, control, and benefit. So we'll put our score 1.5 because we were thinking that project has responded to the result of analysis, age, gender, and diversity, and also addressing need and challenge. Some example we can provide. For example, in a meeting, with the community project team has facilitated the diverse need, so the participant can make full participation on the meeting, including elderly or group with disability and women. Our slicing on the importance of vulnerable improvement had been conducted, education and campaign to prevent domestic violence. We also encouraging women economic through some home gardening activity by providing microfinance, Syariah microfinance. We also making coordination with the government on gender equality issue. We adopting the local wisdom of climate change adaptation activities. We call is Entelid and Kantolo, which is terracing practices in agriculture, in forestry sector, and collaboration with other particularly with what we call a strengthening social forestry project. The third component on our approach is about the attention to negative effect. The first one is do not harm. The project activity has analyzed the risk factor that cause harm and responded to the cause of imbalances in power relation through the awareness raising, mentoring, training, and campaigns. So we assess ourselves and put our scores 1.5, which is adaptive, because we have conducted, for example, that any meeting that we conducted with the community was held around the house, so that women, elderly, and people with disability can attend without leaving household activity. So accessibility is ours, one of our priority. The second one regarding the protection, analysis, and response. The project has communicated long-term need of the community, especially vulnerable group, to the authority to fill the identified need. Having said that, we put our score 1.5, which is adaptive, because we were thinking that our communication with the government has been successful. For example, one district that we assisted has allocated certain budget to support project activity. Another district also provided 1 ton of seed for the community, and then one village allocated also a village fund to support the project and community activities. The fourth component of our approach is adequate participation. This is about participatory approach and recognition of the communal capacities. Based on our assessment, we put our score is still 1, which is inclusive level. We were able to identify and revive the local wisdom we call Kantolo, terracing using the trees, and Kanteli terracing using the stone through the participatory vulnerability and capacity assessment. However, we have not been able to provide a communication method that are accessible to all, especially people with disability. The fifth component is about the accountability. We put score still 1, which is inclusive. Yes, we have established or set up a complaint and feedback mechanism in the community with consultation with them, and then agree what kind of the media we develop for this complaint and feedback mechanism. Project information is delivered also by using local languages, so it will be easily to be understood by whole people in the project site. Male staff has been dedicated to the project and has ensured the implementation of monitoring, evaluation, and accountability, including list of lessons learned. Each partner has also received induction and training regarding to code conduct and safeguarding. The last component of our approach is adequate capacity. In here, based on our self-assessment, we put 1.5 adaptive level with some example that our organizational capacity assessment had been conducted with our local partner in order to identify the gap and the strengths of the project team at partner level. And Islamically protection and inclusion focal point also have supported the project team to ensure a safe and inclusive project. Partner staff have been trying to implement a safe and inclusive activity, including this 6A approach. That's all my presentation. Basically, we have made a progress in terms of using this 6A approach in order to implement the gender equality in this project's implementation, but there is still some room or many room for improvement in the futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ade. And no, it's very good to hear that the government, local government's been receptive, and some of our questions we'll get to at the end will be about how to interface with government. So as we pass on to our last speaker, she can also give us that perspective based on her current position. Dr. Suryani Ika, please.
Thank you so much, Christina, for the opportunity to join this webinar. It's a very important issue about gender and climate change adaptations. I would like to start with the, let me just share the screen first. Yeah. All right. I hope everyone can see the screen, yeah. The title of my presentation today, it's about mainstreaming gender and climate change adaptation in planning and budgeting system using the case study of our province in NTB in Indonesia. I have 3 outline of 4 actually. First, I would like to explain in brief about the NTB province and then the development issues, and then to planning and budgeting, and the last one is the way forward. Well, the NTB province, we have total population around 5 million people, 70% living in Lombok Island, which is on your left-hand side, and then 2 main islands, yeah, Lombok Island and Sumbawa Island. And then for Lombok Island, in our spatial plan, we hope that Lombok will be designed as an eco-city and resilient island, and Sumbawa for sustainable economic zone. So the utilization of natural resources and biodiversity in a sustainable manner that contribute to the economy, and in the long run, it will prosper the community equally. And then if we are looking back a few years, in 2018, we were hit by the earthquake, but now we are recovering. We start developing, not only we have the earthquake in 2018, but also in the early 2020, the global world was with the COVID-19 pandemics. It's also happening in our province, which cause problems as well, and it has impacted our social and economics. So, but we are committed to the global commitment with the SDGs, especially with the SDGs number 13, with the climate action, climate change mitigation, and adaptation policies and strategies. And then our governor and the Vice Governor, Bapak Zulkifli Mansa and Ibu Siti Rohmi Zalilah, they have a great vision for our province, achieving prosperous NTB as a reflection from the well-known saying, Baldatun Toyibatun Warabun Gofur, or as a region that is safe, comfortable, and the happiest, where life is full of wisdom and blessings, with 6 missions. For example, for the mission number 5, we would like to have Entebbe as a prosperous and independent, and then also safe and blessed. And then actually we are all living in the VUCA world. VUCA is the abbreviation for the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So the challenge in realizing the local government initiative to overcome the challenge in the VUCA world. For example, we have the lack of the innovation and technology, lack of the infrastructure, limited development funding, and also limited regulation. So this is the challenge that we are all facing these days. And then if we are looking at the development issues, for example, regarding the Human Development Index, actually it started to increase. For example, in 2022, the Human Development Index is 69.46. Despite that we have been hit by the earthquake and COVID, in 2018 and 2020. And then we are moving to other development issues, such as the increasing economic growth. We are aiming for the green economy. Our economy starts to increase. It has reached 6.95 as a significant increase compared to 2021. However, it was supported mainly by the mining sector. Without the mining sector, our growth would be only 3.42%. So this is the work that we are trying to undertake in our office, how we are going to turn our economic growth more from the non-mining sectors. So we are working toward the green economy by having some strategies, policies, and planning in place for the economic transformations. For the unemployment rate, it has been decreased from 3.01 to 2.89 in year 2022. And then for the poverty rate, actually our poverty rate is quite high as compared to the national poverty rate. Our poverty rate in September 2022, it was 13.82%, and at the national level, it's only 9.57%. And if we look at the urban poverty and rural poverty, we can see that the urban poverty is decreasing, but the rural poverty it's increasing. So this is a very interesting that we need more work so that we can reduce the poverty rate below the 10%. And then in terms of the development planning documents, actually we have the regional development plan and also government development plan. For the regional development plan, we have the long-term development plan, or we call it the RPJPD. It will be for 20 years, consist of vision, mission, policy objective, and development plan. And then we are also having the medium-term development plan for 5 years, consists of vision, mission, policy, objective, and also the development plan. And the last one is the annual development plan. It consists of the economic framework, work plan, and then financing development plan for 1 year. And for the government departments, we have the strategic plan in each of the government departments. We call it RENSTRA. It will last for 5 years, consists of the aim, objective, programs, activities of government departments. This is actually based on their specific functions and responsibilities. Alongside with the RENSTRA, we are also having the annual work plan for the government departments. This is only for 1 year. So it consists of program, activities, location, targets, indicators, financings based on their functions and responsibility. And if we are specifically looking at the gender empowerment index, we are trying to compare our province with the national level and also other provinces such as Sulawesi Selatan, Bali, and NTT. Our gender empowerment index, it's actually a bit low. For example, the green one in 2021, it reached 52.54 as compared to the national level, 76.26. So using three indicators, the proportion of parliamentary seats occupied by females, decision-making role in the workplace, and labor force participation rate. So these are the three indicators for the Gender Empowerment Index. The next one is the Gender Development Index. As compared to the national level, also with other three provinces such as Sulawesi Selatan, Bali, and NTT, our province NTB in 2021, our Gender Development Index has reached 90.53. Actually, this is an increasing rate as compared to the two previous year. For example, in 2019, our Gender Development Index is 90.40, and then it's go up to 90.45, and now it's 90.53. Using four indicators, female and male life expectancy at birth, and then female and male expected years of schooling for children, and then female and male mean years of schooling for adults aged 25 years and older. And then the last one for the indicators is female and male estimated earned income. So these are two important indicators to show how the gender is actually participating in our development. So Gender Empowerment Index and Gender Development Index. So for the planning and budgeting, how we can actually mainstreaming gender and climate change. For example, in the planning, we do have the local regulations number 2 year 2021 for the medium term development plan. Our gender development has already been incorporated for some programs and activities. And then also we have the Governor Regulation number 36 year 2018 regarding the local action plan for SDGs. And then also the last one is the Governor Regulation number 54 year 2019 regarding the local action plan for climate change adaptations. And at this moment, actually, we are trying to sign the MOU with the Ministry of Planning at the national level, so that we will have a more action and collaboration and working on the low carbon development and climate resilience planning documents that will incorporate all the ideas, actions for mitigation and adaptation strategies. And then for the budgeting, programs and activities are supported with various sources of finance from the government, from non-government, NGO, civil society organization, donors, GSR forum, and then also the private sector. For example, at the moment, like from Islamic Relief, we are very grateful, very helpful that Islamic Relief have many projects that help us with the gender and climate change adaptations. And then for the implementation of gender and climate change adaptation will use the guidelines from the central and provincial government. And then we need also to deciding the key performance indicators to actually know how far we can achieve all our targets and what will be the challenges and the opportunities that for our evaluation, so that we can improve our policy and planning in place. and then strengthening the coordination and collaboration with all related stakeholders. And the last one, which is very important, is undertaking the monitoring and evaluations. This is important so that we can understand and take the action, make a right decision about our performance in achieving the indicators for mainstreaming gender and climate change adaptations. Also, in the era of this technology, we need to optimize the use of the application for digital monitoring and evaluation, multi-stakeholder coordinations in meetings, also annual reporting. So for the last one, for the way forward, gender and climate change adaptations, three main ideas are very important. The first one is sustainable development policy, and then how we are having a good planning, and then we also have proper budget allocated for the planning that we have in place. And the last one is monitoring and evaluation system. For the sustainable development policy, actually, there are three things that we can consider here. For example, focusing on sustainable economic development, improving basic public services for socio-cultural development by actually incorporating the GETC issues in the development. And the last one is the managing environmental development for sustainable development in the long run. For planning and budgeting, building data and information system is very important because you can make the right decision by using data and information, and also the result of all the research findings. For example, like Seval and Yulfia and also Ade, all of your research are very important to be incorporated in the policy and planning and budgeting documents as well. And the last one, that we need to ensuring that appropriate budgeting is allocated for gender and climate change adaptation strategies. And the last one, for monitoring and evaluation system, designing digital monitoring and evaluation systems for improving local government performance. And also by having the monitoring and evaluation system in place, we can actually work together and decided what will be the next action that we need to undertake using all the resources that we have in place. Thank you very much from me. Hopefully it will be useful for everyone so that we can learn and share about the important issues in gender and climate change adaptation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ake. Thank you to all of the panelists, especially for bringing it back to the SDGs, which is an important part of the G20, and also fascinating about the mining. I will just remind folks who hopefully, well, we hope everyone can stay on a couple more minutes because we want to get to some questions. But if you do have to drop off at the top of the hour, just a reminder, if you visit the G20interfaith.org, the next webinar actually will be around deep sea mining. So now that we have all the panelists back, I'm going to address these couple of questions that came in. No order of who wants to answer. So if it's something that you're able to answer, please jump in on them. And then we will, wrap this up as we're almost out of time, but I want to make sure we get to our audience participation. So one of them was, thank you again for all of the research that was presented. And obviously, the problems that you've mentioned and you've addressed with some solutions are not unique to Indonesia. So there was a question whether you're planning other studies in other countries. I think that's more for the G20, but also to Islamic Relief Worldwide as well, given the scope and the number of countries they work in. There was a question also if the Indonesian government has done anything in lieu of, the research that you've presented. I know some of that has just been addressed, but are there any laws or government help for women specifically to help mitigate this problem, since that was something we looked at specifically today? And, thank you for addressing the multiple of earthquakes that have happened. We know also, those who have been following the news, that Jakarta, the capital city, is sinking, and the government is looking at how to actually transition an entire capital. So we can look at it in that framework. Another question was around recommendations you would give to the G20 writ large, so to the global community based on these studies that you've shared. And then finally, given that we mentioned at the outset that we're looking through a faith lens through the G20 Interfaith Forum, faith wasn't mentioned a lot today. It was set up in the beginning by Saval, but if you can address also, working not just with women, but women of faith and leaders in the faith community and imams and others, how some of that was done as well. Please, I open the floor to any of these questions.
So I can start by just answering the first question very briefly in terms of what we are doing at IRW. And thank you to whoever asked this question, because it is an important one. And we definitely don't want this research to exist in a silo. It comes out of our programming and the projects that we have on the ground. And we have these projects in many different countries as well. And we want it to be a continuation. We want to be able to put this at the heart of everything that we do, which includes both our programming and our research. And we want to draw a through line through all of these things, which are happening in different contexts and maybe happening in slightly different ways, but which are impacting women worldwide. For instance, when the floods in Pakistan happened, we saw that women were much more severely impacted because they did not have the adaptive skills. They didn't know how to swim. They didn't know how to climb trees. They weren't used to, or they weren't allowed to be in an environment outside of their homes. So they struggled to get to safe places, whereas men were able to do that much more quickly and much more efficiently. And we published a research paper where we spoke about this, and where we also still have programs on the ground that are geared towards addressing this need. So definitely this is something that exists worldwide, and is definitely something that we're working on with our upcoming projects as well. We don't want just to be, oh, this is about gender, this is about something else. We want gender to exist as a component of everything that we write about and everything that we do, because that's how it exists in the world. And so all of these other projects, even when we're writing about food insecurity, we're thinking about how does gender play into this and what are the intersections of vulnerability. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, and I'll leave the floor for the other questions.
Any of the other speakers wish to answer?
Yeah, just to respond on the government's policy. So there is currently there's a new, what we call the framework of development planning. We call low carbon developments and climate resilience framework. At national level, it was included into long-term and mid-term development planning. And currently, Islamic Relief Indonesia is working together with the provincial and district government to make sure that a similar framework will be included into provincial and district levels development plannings. We hope that by having this at all government level, we will ensure that our community resiliency, including the gender issue in the climate sector, will be addressed properly at field levels, and all people will be in a good situation because of the government program receiving the sufficient budget allocation to meet the community need on that kind of sector.
Can I share some answer? So this is, I will not answer directly to the second question from Mariana about what recommendation would we give for G20, but I remember that recently we have, I'm involving in working with a provincial government in designing environmental-based budget transfer. And then we also think about how to accommodate the issue of gender, to address the issue of gender. I found myself found that there is a challenge to bring the issue of gender into how to meet the top level of policy into action, because there are some, like for example, like we lack of gender segregation data, like men and data on men and women, and now we have the also focus on disability and social inclusion, GETSI. So it will be more complicated, and I know this we need more serious attention to these GETSI aspects in the future. And I also have a concern on if we encourage the GETSI groups to participate in development, I'm worried that our strategies, if we choose wrong strategies, push them to participate or take control or anything. If we overlook the cultural aspects, it will be very dangerous, because that will be a double burden for those groups. Thank you.
And then we have one last question that came in as well, and then we will conclude today's webinar. But one last question was around global media coverage and visibility. So, someone asked, in comparison to other countries, do you feel that Indonesia gets the needed attention on climate change issues, both the issues it's facing and also the solutions that it's already providing? And do you see that there's enough coverage, and how can we amplify it to be more? And again, to any of you.
Yes, that's a very good questions actually. Related with the what happened at the global level, and also it will have an impact at the local level as well. So the climate change issues has been the main concern of the central government, especially the Ministry of Planning, Bappenas in Jakarta. So recently we have the training for the local government, how we can work together in designing the green economy index. So we are not only thinking about our economic growth, but also how our economic growth will have a very positive impact on the environment. It means that in the long run, we will have sustainable development in place. So regarding these questions, I think the attention from the global world for Indonesia, it's very it's amazing, yeah, with all the helps that we have, such as from the Islamic Relief, and then the ability, what needs to be developed actually in the first place for us, it's with the data and information systems that we need to have very strong, how we can sort of improve our performance with our action for climate change. Not only that we are working for the adaptation, but also actually mitigation and adaptation, they are very important. And then for the adaptation, it's for the long run, the adaptation, it will be part of our daily life, then we get used to it. But for mitigation, we can sort of focusing directly with the emission reduction. So I think the local actions for climate change adaptations with the gender mainstreaming, we can bring it to more broad, for example, like GETSI, yeah? GETSI, it's gender equality, disability, also social inclusions. Local action need to be strengthening so that it will contribute to the global commitments such as the SDGs. Yeah, more or less. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists who joined us today. I know it's very late in the evening in Indonesia, so we want to allow you to get back to what you were doing. And I think the perspective today of bringing it from, local to the global stage is so important, because we can't look at the global issues without going into that microcosm of what's happening at a local level. So thank you to our humanitarians doing this work, our academics and researchers, and to our government and policy people, all of who are able to give those perspectives today, which I think it's so important. I want to give a special thanks to the G20 Interfaith Forum, especially to the advisory group that allowed us, when we presented this concept, to allow us to showcase this work today. Also to the BYU, Brigham Young University technical team, who jumped on very early in the morning to set up this platform for us. So on behalf of the advisory, on behalf of Islamic Relief, on behalf of all of our panelists who joined us today, we want to thank you, all of our listeners today who joined us. We hope you found this beneficial. It was recorded. If you weren't able to stay on for all, if you have other colleagues that you think would benefit, please do share the learning, and please continue to stay engaged with the Interfaith Forum through other forum and events that are coming up in the future. Thank you once again to all of our panelists and speakers, and we look forward. I don't know if anyone wants to put a plug for where the research can be found. Maybe Sival, could you point folks to a research link? Go ahead and shout that out, and then we will close up today's proceedings.
Yeah, so it's on our IRW website with the rest of our publications. If you just click on the publication link, it should be there. I can also pop the link in the chat later.
All right, thank you. So we'll share that out. We'll share that out to all who registered today. And thank you once again, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. We hope you have a wonderful and blessed rest of your week. Thank you so much.